Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. Now, you might be somewhat confused right now, because the title of the video is the Tier 5 Cruiser Experience, and that's definitely not a Tier 5 cruiser. You're right, it isn't. But you'll see why it's important later. This is the Pyotr Veliki, or Peter the Great, the Russian Tier 5 battleship, armed with 356mm guns. This is fairly standard for Tier 5 and Tier 6 battleships. 14-inch or 356mm guns. Remember that number, 356mm. It's going to be very important. Because before we start with today's main event, we're going to talk about Overmatch. Now, for those of you who don't understand exactly what Overmatch means in World of Warships, Overmatch is the process whereby armour of various different thickness thresholds can, depending on the calibre of the armour-piercing shell being fired at that armour, be completely ignored because the armour-piercing shell is just so big compared to the armour that it's hitting. Yeah? Okay. Now remember, the Pyotr Veliki's guns, 356mm in calibre, and that's important because it bridges an armour threshold. And that's the 19mm armour threshold, which the Pyotr Veliki can overmatch. But it cannot overmatch 25mm. That requires guns with a calibre of 358mm. So the Pyotr Veliki and all other battleships armed with 14-inch guns cannot overmatch the bow or stern plating of Tier 8, 9 or 10 cruisers. But the Pyotr Veliki is only a Tier 5 battleship. It's not going to be fighting Tier 8, 9 or 10 cruisers. What it is going to be fighting are a whole bunch of Tier 5 cruisers, like the Omaha here, that only has 13mm of bow and stern plating. And the Omaha is not alone in this respect. It's the same for all other Tier 5 cruisers. Even the Furataka, which has the reputation of being probably the toughest Tier 5 cruiser, only has 13mm of bow plating, as does the Marblehead, which is basically just a copy of the Omaha, as is the Murmansk, a Russian version of the Omaha. It's no different for the Kirov. The Russians don't get any special treatment here. The Königsberg, the same, 13mm. The Emerald has a 13mm bow, but it does have a 38mm icebreaker, although that's not really going to help it too much, and we'll see why in a moment. The Hawkins has an even better icebreaker than the Emerald, but it still has that 13mm bow at the top. The Exeter is particularly vulnerable with that 13mm bow extending all the way back to the bridge, the Emil Bertin, even worse, all the way past the bridge, and the Italians don't get any special treatment here either. All of them have bow and stern plating of a mere 13mm, which can be overmatched by guns with a calibre of 186mm, which means that heavy cruisers, not just battleships, can also overmatch all of that armour. But the weakness of the armour is only half of the problem. The other half of the problem is the size of the Citadels. Tier 5 cruisers across the board all have horrendously vulnerable Citadels. I mean, look at the Citadel on the Hawkins. It's basically the entire ship, other than the bow and the stern. The Königsberg Citadel extends above the waterline. It's kind of narrow, but it's very, very long. The Emerald's Citadel is horrific, with most of it projecting well above the waterline. The Kirov's doesn't sit too far above the waterline, but it is absolutely huge. And then, of course, we come to the Omaha. Ugh! And of course, the Omaha also means the Murmansk and both versions of the Marblehead. Even the Furataka has a horribly exposed and vulnerable Citadel. So what happens when you take that absolutely terrible 13mm of bow and stern plating, which can be overmatched even by heavy cruisers, let alone battleships, and you combine it with Citadels that are horribly exposed, mostly above the waterline, and often occupy more than half of the entire length of the ship? In today's video, we're going to find out. Courtesy of Too Fast for Everyone here, who by a remarkable coincidence is in the 14-inch gun-armed Tier 5 Soviet battleship, the Pyotr Veliki. Wow, what a coincidence. Who'd have seen that one coming? This is an all Tier 5 battle. There are 5 battleships per team in this match, 10 in total, 2 Pyotr Velikis, 4 Congos, always a popular choice, and both of the Pyotr Velikis and all 4 of the Congos are armed with 356mm guns, with the remainder filled up by the German Tier 5 König and the British Tier 5 Iron Duke, neither of whom have 356mm guns. with the Iron Duke sporting 343mm guns, and the German Koenigs, 3 in total, all having only 305mm guns. But for them at least, that's potentially only really going to be an issue when they're firing at other angled battleships. It's not going to be a problem at all when they're firing at any of the 10 cruisers in this match, because, as we've seen, they only have 13mm of plating, and to overmatch that, all you need is a 186mm gun. And the first enemy ships have been spotted. One is a Königsberg, one is a Congo. I wonder who everybody's going to be firing at first. Shots already out from one of the other battleships against the Königsberg. And that Königsberg is going to be saved. An early trip to Davy Jones's locker, first by the terrible aim of the first battleship that took a shot at him, and also the fact that the Congo, slightly to his rear, is presenting a much, much juicier target at the moment, with a nice big flat broadside for Too Fast to shoot at. Shots out. It's looking fairly good. Yeah, not bad. Not great, but definitely not bad. So the Königsberg escapes becoming the first victim of the match, but there are plenty more Tier 5 cruisers out there, like this Omaha, who's managed to beach himself broadside on. And is taking a hail of high explosive fire. But it's not the high explosive that he really needs to worry about. I mean, the high explosive is going to hurt, but he's managed to go undetected, so it wasn't going to kill him. No, it was the 14-inch armour-piercing shells. Yeah. Still, at least the Königsberg got away with it. Oh, there he is. Still charging forward. On full health. He is angled in, though. I mean, that has to count for something, right? Well, not when you have 13mm of armour plating and a horribly exposed Citadel. Oh, I bet that one made his eyes water. The Emile Bertin at least has the right idea. He's just as vulnerable as all of the other Tier 5 cruisers and World of Warships, but he's hiding behind the island and firing over it as and when he can. I guess if there can be said to be a particular theme to today's video, it can be summarised as this. Tier 5 cruisers. Stop it! Stop rushing forward into certain death. You're not big, you're not hard, you're not clever, and you definitely can't tank anything. The Emile Bertin, on the other hand, while he's just as vulnerable as every other Tier 5 cruiser in the game, is not making himself a massive target. In fact, he's doing such a good job of not making himself a massive target that Too Fast is electing to shoot at the angled Congo instead. He keeps looking at the Emile Bertin, licking his lips in hunger, because he knows if he can get a shot at him, he'll kill him. But the Emile Bertin is not allowing him to get a shot. He can probably finish off the Congo here. Note, by the way, that the first 4 casualties in this battle were all Tier 5 cruisers. There is a definite pattern emerging here, because Tier 5 cruisers have no armour, and they're made almost entirely out of Citadels. Unlocking your first Tier 5 cruiser can be a serious wake-up call to most players when they begin playing World of Warships for the first time. On the one hand, you finally have a ship that usually at least looks vaguely modern, with turrets in a sensible arrangement, something that looks like it might have appeared in a World War II war movie. I can remember being very excited early on in my World of Tanks career when I finally got my hands on the Panzer III, something that actually looked like a tank I could recognise. And there's a similar experience in World of Warships and cruisers when you get to Tier 5, where you unlock ships that mostly don't look as if they were built in the 19th century. Unfortunately, one of the things that you miss when you reach Tier 5 is the protected matchmaking that you enjoyed at Tiers 2, 3 and 4, where you would only have to fight ships that at most were 1 tier above you. Now, the cruisers in this battle don't have to fight anybody who's 1 tier above them. This is an all Tier 5 battle, but they could and would get into battles where they would have to face anything up to Tier 7, and that can come as a really, really big shock when you're in something that only has 13mm of armour plating and a Citadel the size of the state of Nebraska. Because at Tier 7, there are a lot more heavy cruisers around as well as battleships, and as we've already seen, heavy cruisers on with 203mm guns can also overmatch 13mm of bow plating. And just like every battleship in the game, can also bitch slap the bejesus out of you right through your bow plating as if it wasn't even there. Because as far as the overmatch mechanics are concerned, they're not. So you get to tier 5 in your cruisers and you combine the sudden violent proliferation of gun calibers that can basically treat your armour as if it's non-existent with citadels that occupy most of the hull of your ship and often protrude alarmingly above the waterline. So it's perhaps not at all surprising whatsoever that even in this tier 5 only battle, where there are not that many guns available that can bitch slap the way through your armour as if it was just a mild inconvenience, to find that even at this early stage, barely 6 minutes into the game, 80% of the casualties are tier 5 cruisers. So, once again, for the hard of hearing. Oh, and there goes another one. I spoke too soon. Another tier 5 cruiser has bitten the dust. The Emile Bertin has wisely decided, screw you guys, I'm going home. He's getting out of here. But once again, just in case I haven't made the message clear, and don't worry, there are going to be further examples very, very soon. Tier 5 cruisers. Stop it! You're not big, you're not hard, you're not clever. Stop rushing forward into certain death. Try to be more like the Emile Bertin over there, who, despite the fact that he spent, well, pretty much all of this battle thus far hiding behind an island, has still been bitch slapped to within an inch of his life, and narrowly avoided being ended right there, saved only by the not particularly great dispersion of the Piotr Veliky's guns. But to be completely fair to the captain of the Emile Bertin over there, he has not been making it easy for anybody to kill him. First, by hiding behind the island. Second, by heading away and presenting a very narrow profile for Too Fast to shoot at. And third, by not continuing to return fire and lighten himself up so that he can continue to be shot at. 3 characteristics which I think you'll agree have not exactly been uppermost in the minds of any of the other tier 5 cruisers that we've seen thus far in today's battle. It turns out, shocking though it may seem, that not making yourself a massive, huge, juicy target tends to extend your lifespan a lot longer than rushing forward, guns blazing right at the start of the match, straight into a hail of large caliber armour-piercing gunfire. And oh dear, I think I might have spoken just a little bit too soon. Oh well, never mind. The Emile Bertin did extremely well up until that point, considering the position he was in, and he very, very nearly managed to get out of it, although looking at the scores, it's doubtful whether or not he would have been able to survive for too much longer. But if you are in the unfortunate position of grinding your way through the tier 5 cruiser lines of all nations, regardless, at this point in your World of Warships career, if you ever plan on making it to the tier 6 cruisers in anything less than 50 battles, you really, really, really have to stop doing stuff like this. Hello, Mr. Omaha. Goodbye, Mr. Omaha.
Enemy cruiser destroyed. Our victory is in.
And there's the Kraken. When you get to tier 6, it does get better, because your armour goes from 13 to 16 millimeters, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but that extra 3 millimeters does make a critical difference, because it means the heavy cruisers can no longer overmatch your bow and stern and citadel you from the front or rear. The battleships still can. But the heavy cruisers at least can't. And there are a lot more heavy cruisers that you're going to be facing at tier 6 than you would have been facing at tier 5 anyway, so it does make a difference. But having that extra 3 millimeters of armour plating isn't going to save you if you continue to charge straight into the teeth of a hail of large caliber armour piercing fire, guns blazing right in the beginning of every battle you find yourself in. That extra 3 millimeters of armour isn't going to save you if you continue to show the broadside of your ship at point blank range to anybody firing armour piercing shells, hell, even some destroyers. The extra armour will help under certain circumstances, but you need to know what those circumstances are. You'll be able to angle against heavy cruisers, which will be a relief after coming up from tier 5, but you still won't be able to angle against battleships. Knowing how to play, as always, is going to be of far greater benefit to you, as demonstrated by the captain of the Emile Bertin, than a nominal 3 millimeters of extra armour plating on the bow and stern of your ship. Oh, and there's the Confederate award. Nice hits against it. Oh, he's dead too. Okay.
Our victory is in
Yes, our victory is in sight. 10 Tier 5 cruisers entered this Tier 5 battle. 7 of them have died. The mathematics there isn't too hard, a 70% casualty rate. Admittedly, not as great as the casualty rate suffered by the destroyers, who have lost 75%. But the enemy Congo over there, who's about to receive a very nasty slapping, is about to dramatically worsen those odds for the Tier 5 cruisers. Note the Marblehead angled away, and exactly how much difference did that make? And that has just raised the casualty rate of the cruisers in this battle, who were all technically top tier, to a shocking 80%. People often say in World of Warships that destroyer captains have a life expectancy of mayflies, and while most destroyer captains would probably admit that there's a certain amount of truth to that, they can always console themselves by the knowledge that at least they're not Tier 5 cruisers. Perfectly demonstrated for us today by Too Fast for Everyone, getting 6 kills, Kraken Unleashed, First Blood, Devastating Strike and Confederate in the Tier 5 Russian battleship, the Pyotr Veliky. Today's video was sponsored by the Benevolent Society for the Support of Tier 5 Cruiser Captain Widows. Remember kids, every time a Tier 5 cruiser tries to bow tank or gives broadside to a battleship, God kills a kitten. Together, we can end the slaughter. Hope you enjoyed today's video, folks, and I sincerely hope if you're currently grinding your way through the Tier 5 cruisers, you've learned a thing or two. And as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.